Hi, everybody. Mitch Tanenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today. This is the Security News Update for August 20th, 2023. In the reference department, one of the challenges that security folks have is getting management and the board's attention. But once you have their attention, the question then becomes, well, what do you do? What's the plan? And the board and management both are interested in managing risk, that's a normal thing, and liability. So how do you go off and speak to what they're concerned about? That's really the challenge. Great article in Dark Reading that talks about that. And obviously, if you need help, we'll be happy to help you with that. Next, in important issues, we have a large number now of AI copyright lawsuits. And that's a warning to businesses that are both using AI and training AI. Do you really own the copyright, or do you have the permission from the copyright owner to use whatever content you're doing? The answer for the most part for the large language models that are floating around today is no. And what's happening is companies are getting sued over it, and that will wind up being ultimately that'll wind up being end users. But right now, it's people who are creating the large language models. So, excuse me. So think about that in your AI plans. Next, there's this concept of bulletproof hosting. Bulletproof hosting is folks that provide virtual servers to crooks, and the theory is that they won't get taken down. Typically, these are in places where we don't exactly have friendly relationships with the folks that are running the country, like North Korea, Russia, China, places like that. And when we ask them to take down a server, they kind of thumb their nose at us and tell us to go to hell. In this particular case, these guys are running supposedly bulletproof servers in Poland. Now, Poland is not one of those countries. As a result, when we figured out what was going on and where it was located, we asked the nice people in Poland to go yank those servers, and they did. So there is probably thousands of virtual servers that are now turned off as a result of work that our law enforcement did in cooperation with Polish law enforcement. Next, here's an interesting thing. Insurance, you're always worried about with insurance that you're not getting what you paid for. But here's the other side of that. There is starting out with, most companies have a commercial general liability policy. And one of the things that those policies often have is what's called a duty to defend. And as long as potentially whatever you're doing is covered under or might be covered under the policy, they have a duty to pay for your defense. Well, this particular insurance company, National Union Fire, refused to defend the company, saying the lawsuit was not covered because of some particulars. Well, it turns out the courts did not agree with the National Union Fire, and even though they only had a $1 million policy, the court ordered them to pay past and future legal expenses, and so far that's $91.5 million. So that's always a good thing to look at. What your coverage is. Go ask your attorneys. Make sure that if you need to use your policy, that you're not. The insurance companies will often say no, it's not covered, but that may or may not be true. In the education department, AI is turning out to be a great hacking tool in addition to everything else. A researcher got ChatGPT to read an email message, compile a summary, and publish it on the web. Well, that's actually sounds like it could be beneficial. But these AIs have APIs, and it looks like, for the most part, that if you can go off and give the API the right, what's called prompt, the question you're asking the AI, then it'll go off and do that, and it'll do it silently. This is called a prompt injection attack. And so in this particular case, this could have been done totally secretly without the user even having an inkling it was being done. In this particular case, for this particular attack, OpenAI now blocks this in the API, but that doesn't mean that the next million different attacks that they will block. And so this is sort of the downside of these AI APIs. Next, I'm going to take two together. These are breaches. One is, and they're both related to the Move It software. One is the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, and they are alerting more than 4 million people that their data was compromised. In this particular case, we see this a lot. The HCPF is blaming IBM, who is their vendor. And while that's true, nonetheless, it's also HCPF's issue. And depending on what their contract says, IBM might be liable to pay the bills or they might not. Next, the Oregon Health Plan used a different vendor, in this case, PH Tech, and that vendor used Move It. And in this particular case, the sensitive information that they lost were medical diagnoses and claim information, amongst other information. Whether PH Tech is going to be required to pay or not pay is unclear. It's really a function of what the contract between this organization, the Oregon Health Plan, and this vendor, PH Tech, says. And I would say for the most part, these contracts tend to be relatively silent about it. So from your perspective, if you have contracts with vendors and they have your data, you probably don't want it to be silent. That's really not a good plan. Next, people learn lessons that, sometimes it takes a few years. So about 15 years ago, a group of researchers hacked the MBTA's fare card, MBTA being the Boston Transit Authority, and they were going to present their findings at Black Hat, but the MBTA didn't like the fact that these guys were hacking their fare card, so they filed a lawsuit against DEF CON, and unfortunately, it didn't really work right because while they did get the presentation canceled, the paper, which the presentation was based on, was already public, so they didn't really stop much. Well, this year or last year, a group of 15-year-olds, as I recall, really young kids, decided to see if they could go off and replicate this particular attack, which they did. It turns out that the MBTA had changed the fare card that they were using to another one, but it was still vulnerable. It didn't make any difference that it was a different one. But this time the MBTA, instead of suing these kids, they asked them to come to MBTA headquarters, explain to them what they had done, gave them their blessing to go present at Black Hat. They said, a few of these details, please don't disclose, so that it's not easy for somebody to actually execute this attack. They plan on replacing these fare cards. They're not going to fix the bugs. That's number one. They are replacing these fare cards in 2025 with another system, maybe just as insecure as the last two. But at least they learned something that suing people really doesn't make your security any better. Next question is, are privacy and trade secrets on a collision course? A great article from an attorney who says they are. I understand the attorney's viewpoint, but I just disagree with it completely. I think that that's a useful conversation for people to look at and understand, to see where they sit in the equation. The courts are probably, more in favor of the privacy laws and less in favor of the fact that this may be inconvenient for companies, but we shall see where it goes. Next, hackers are selling access to a multi-billion-dollar auction house, which is kind of nice. The hacking business has become very state of the art, and they wind up outsourcing a lot of pieces of the business. So part of that is what they call initial access brokers, or IABs. And what these guys do is they break in and they sell credentials, and the price of credentials can be, for a standard user, might be as low as $150 for a small company, but for an admin user to a big company, it could be $1,000 or more. In this particular case, they've got access to a multi-billion-dollar auction house, and they're selling those credentials for $120,000. But here's the question. If the bad guys had broken into your place, they'd stolen the credentials, but they hadn't necessarily done anything obviously bad at this point, would you know that your credentials had been compromised? My guess is probably not. Kind of think about that one. And lastly, the security news bites for this week. The Colorado Attorney General sent welcome letters, I call that affectionately, to companies that he thinks have to comply with the Colorado Privacy Act. And the contents of the letter kind of basically said, this first letter is going to be nice, but if you don't get your act together, the second letter probably won't be anywhere near as nice. The White House is going to host a roundtable on harmful data broker practices. They're trying to figure out a way to tie in the limitations on data sale from the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This will only represent a niche piece of data, but still, if we can go off and take this particularly sensitive data and get it off the market, that might be useful. Next, the jury awarded a young lady $1.2 billion in the case of a revenge porn lawsuit. It turns out that this particular guy who was posting pictures of this lady was being particularly obnoxious and really causing this lady some serious angst. And so I think the court decided to send the message, $1.2 billion worth. Next, we're seeing, in some of these lawsuits that are going on right now with former President Trump, what we're just seeing, without regard to whether or not you think the lawsuits are valid or not, that's not the point. These guys apparently are memorializing stuff in emails and text messages, which would at least appear to be illegal or potentially illegal. Why would you do that? Why would you go off and document things that have the potential to come back and haunt you? It just doesn't seem like a really bright way to handle things. And lastly, the U.S. Space Force has created its first team that targets foreign satellites. This is probably very similar to what a lot of our adversaries are doing. The benign part of this is tracking satellites, ground stations, communications, protocols, all that stuff. The not so benign stuff is taking satellites out. And I think this is another one of those mutually assured destruction kind of things. You take out our satellites, we'll take out your satellites. But it's interesting, and I'm sure we'll never hear the details because hopefully it's classified, nobody leaks it. So that's really all I have for this week. If you need help with any of these subjects, please reach out to us, of course. And until next time, stay safe. Thanks for listening.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.